Let's go. So many different folks wanting to chat today. Let's go next to Glenn from Virginia. Glenn, you're on the air.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. This is my first time calling. Thanks for taking the call.
Pleasure.
My question for you is with respect to voting rights. Just to give you context, I am an African American in my mid 40s, and I fear that there will likely be no meaningful voting rights legislation coming down the pipeline. So, my question for you is, do you think the Democrats mischaracterized, well, let me rephrase, instead of saying mischaracterized, do you think that they did a poor job in messaging? As you know, so much with respect to legislation comes down to messaging. And what I mean by that is with voting rights legislation, do you think the Democrats would have done themselves more of a service if they sold it as an issue for the less powerful, the less connected, those who are in perhaps rural areas and having access to voting, as opposed to selling it more of a race issue with respect to black and brown people? Do you think the Democrats sort of fumbled the football, so to speak, in that regard?
It's always hard to go back and say what might have been, but it's a good question, which is if the framing along defending voting rights and pushing back against all of these wacky right-wing bills had been they are going after the little guy rather than they are targeting disproportionately non-white minorities, would it have been better received? Here's the thing. For the people on the left who understand the issue, they're already behind supporting voting rights in a real way and fighting back against what Republicans are doing. And if the left had framed it in the way you suggest, the right is still going to be just as against it, and they would come up with some way to justify it. And so then it just becomes a fight of like, do they do it effectively or not? I just don't know. Sometimes one of the mistakes we make is we say, hey, you know what? Here's the talking point they came up with. And that talking point was so easily defeated. Here's a different talking point that would have been much better. But what you have to remember is if the talking point had been different, their response also would have been different. And so I just don't know, because fundamentally, Republican elected officials know that they need all of these different voter suppression tactics in order to win, and they were going to justify them one way or the other. So it's hard for me to say that it would have been much more successfully argued if they argued along class rather than race lines. And to be honest, they did also argue it along class lines, because often it's about poor areas, not non-white areas.
Yeah, I agree. I just look back at some of the tactics of the Obama administration, especially in the 2012 campaign. They sort of anticipated the backlash, so to speak, and they were
Yeah.
much more nimble in making the class warfare argument. And even if the Republican attempts are based on racial sensitivities, I just think you do yourself a lot more of a service if you make the class warfare argument.
Yeah,
But
I'm not disagreeing with you. My only caveat would be I think the Republican Party would have been ready for that as well, but I don't think you're wrong.
okay, fair
Yeah.
enough. Thanks for my call.
All right, thanks, Glenn. There's Glenn. Very, very important topic. I mean, a great question to be asking. One of our sponsors is called Privacy. Privacy is a totally free service that I've been using for years. Privacy lets me create virtual payment cards with one click, and when I use the virtual card, the money is taken out of my bank account. You can create multiple cards, delete them, freeze them, set a spending limit on them. Let's say I'm signing up for a free trial and it requires a credit card. Privacy will autofill a virtual card number, and then after signing up, I can delete that virtual card. So I know I'm not going to be charged again. Something really useful and very practical. Or let's say I'm ordering food over the phone, but I left my wallet somewhere. I don't have my real credit card on me. I can use a virtual card on my Privacy mobile app. But really the best part is you're not out there exposing your real credit card number, so you're not as susceptible to data breaches and identity theft. Privacy is a totally free service, and you'll get $5 to spend when you go to privacy.com/Pacman. The link is right underneath this video.